Please join me in welcoming Mitch to Google.
Great. Great. Thanks, Martin. And I still want to keep this a secret just in case. I just don't like anybody to know I actually take pictures. So anyway, I wanted to talk a little bit about photography. So at least my world in photography. To me, it's real. The images that I show were never really meant to be like commercial images, or they really were for me just to document my experience of how I saw the world, pretty much for my family, for my children, kind of to leave something behind. I don't expect to be here another 50 years, probably not another 20 years even, but I wanted to leave something behind. I came out of a little bit about me, even though I don't want to talk a lot about me. It's more about the work. You know, I came out of the East Coast. I grew up there. Pretty interesting background, but had nothing to do with art or photography or any of those aspects. And I was introduced probably when I was about 18, and probably getting into a lot of trouble, to the work of like Ansel Adams and Minor White. And I had never seen anything like that before in my life. So my father, in his kind of way of try to get me kind of grounded in life, slung me a little rangefinder camera. And as soon as I picked up the camera, I just felt like I was electrified. And I started to take off and take pictures. And being on the East Coast, for me at least, there wasn't a lot to photograph. So looking at the pictures of Ansel Adams and starting to study his work, I got into the wet darkroom and into film cameras, became interested in technology. Didn't really want to be overwhelmed by the technology, or I wanted to know enough about it, so I started to work in sensitometry, which was pretty much the manufacturing of film. So I ended up in a lab with a bunch of scientists with silver nitrate and acetate and a paintbrush and a bunch of developer, and started to create film, and then read that stuff with the densitometer and then pretty much understand film, which helped me not being intimidated by the tools that I was using. So anyway, I was also introduced by somebody called Pete Turner at the time, so I ended up working with Pete as one of his assistants. And Pete Turner kind of taught me at the time just to break all the rules of photography, never to follow any rules or anything that anybody says unless it's positive. So he got me into experimenting with film. So I would experiment taking Ektachrome type film and developing in C41, which was for development in negative film, and just see what those things were like. And infrared photography, shooting tungsten film in daylight, just breaking every rule, which actually led to a grant from Canon Camera when I was about 20 that got me out of New York, thank God, and into the West Coast. So I started traveling the country and started to see the landscapes that Ansel Adams and Minor White and Edward Weston had photographed. And it was a bit overwhelming to me. Anyway, did a show in LA when I was about 21. Met my beautiful wife, had a bunch of kids, ran a business, and gave up photography for 20 years. Pretty much to raise a family and raise my children. And picked up a camera again, probably about 2006. And again, I was overwhelmed by what I started to see when I started looking at through the camera lens again. A friend had took me out to Death Valley, and I became totally involved with photography again. So this journey here is roughly about 10 years worth of work. I'm going to start some of the things that about photography for me are, it's really about light, seeing light, being able to paint with light. A lot of the stuff in landscape photography, at least for me, is we live in somewhat of a world that can be sometimes chaotic. There's a lot of sensory overload. And when I go out to shoot landscapes, first of all, I see in black and white. I've always seen in black and white. It's an artistic expression for me that allows me, at least, to interpret how I see the world. But in the painting of light, it's almost like it's allowing all the chaos to take form. So even when I'm out shooting landscape photography, there's so many different compositions, there's so many things to shoot. It allows me to kind of ground myself, to be able to have everything that I'm thinking, everything that I'm seeing, take a certain form. It's almost like seeing walking into a dark room, and out from the bright sunshine. And most of the times when I go out to these landscapes, it takes a couple of days for me just to detox from life in Los Angeles and everything else. They're all good things, there's nothing bad about that, but just to get into the mode of being a photographer and seeing as a photographer. So usually for the first couple of days, I don't really even shoot. I might scout, I might just try to get quiet, try to get back into my body again, and see the world in a much quieter place, in a place that has a certain form, a certain peace. It's almost like when I'm standing outside, everything, I've said it before, things just get quiet, time seems to truncate. I can hear my heart beat again, which is a rare occasion. And a peace comes over to me, and I can see in a certain way when I take pictures. So I've also, obviously, from some of the things you say, I've been in my past been influenced a lot by things like science fiction. Some of the movies when I was growing up that were most important to me were, like, my favorite movie of all time is King Kong, like the 1933 version of it, and The Wizard of Oz. Those are the things that influenced me visually. So this is like 2006, going out to Monument Valley. I became interested in volcanoes. This happens to be an ancient volcano. What happens with some of these structures are, if you can imagine, I don't know how many years ago, 10,000 years ago, that this is basically the lava core. It was covered with dirt. The dirt erodes over the lava core, eventually starts to erode the lava core. And I started to become interested in those type of structures. Most of the times when I go out, I will go out for weeks at a time. I would say photographing the landscape for me is kind of like photographing a person. When I'm out there, I never really take a snapshot. I know when I first get out there, I'm wasting my time if I'm just shooting away. I like to usually go out alone, so it's really quiet. But I like to understand the landscape a little bit, understand it. Like if I was shooting a portrait of a person, I wouldn't just not know you, say hello, take a picture, and think I was a great photographer. Maybe they're all great photographers. Annie Leibowitz's of the world, I don't even think she does that. But I like to stay there for a while, just quietly, looking around, watching the light, looking at the different compositions, until I can kind of understand my subject and understand what the light is. I always love to go out in inclement weather. That's when I see light being the most interesting to me. Also low contrast situations. Though, as a photographer, it's really interesting to shoot in all different types of situations. It kind of allows you to expand your abilities, just to say, this is what it's giving me. How can I create an image? What am I feeling? If I don't get into that feeling, I know I'm kind of wasting my time. It's almost like getting into a zone, like a basketball player or something, when they get into a zone. I have to take the time to get into a certain zone to be able to take pictures. There's also things, this is an interesting one because this is shiprock. It's also, spiritual center of the Navajos. So going out to Farmington, I went out there with my family, with my wife and my son. We were out there, I think, for 10 days. And there was something kind of special about this, something special to be. I've spent a lot of time in southern Utah and so forth with the American Indians, and especially with the Navajos. And there was something extremely special about this rock. And I actually had seen this picture. A lot of times before I go out, I'll do research or I'll see a picture in my head of exactly what I wanted to photograph. And in this case, when I saw the initial pictures of Shiprock in my head, I always saw a rock in motion, that it wasn't just a rock, but it was an alive rock. But what happened is I was out there, I think, for 10 days and never got a picture that I really liked. I never got into that zone. And I was a little frustrated, and I think it was the 8th day. It was cold out. It was probably 10 degrees out. I got up at 4 in the morning. It was about a 50-mile ride from Farmington out to Shiprock. And as I got up, I was like, "You're an idiot. What are you getting up for? You stay in bed with your family. You'll be cozy. You're not going to get any pictures." Everything's running through my brain like, what an idiot, So I got into my truck, and I'm driving out there with a cup of coffee, and the whole time it's like, it's getting dark. It's like nothing. What am I doing? Wasting my time again. And I got out there, and I had scouted this location. And when I got out there, there was the cloud cover had dropped below Shiprock, and you could not see Shiprock. And I stood out there, I think, for about 6 hours, just waiting. And it was a real spiritual experience for me. This is a real special picture for me, because this is both that. This is the picture I had seen in my head when I was out there. Besides that, what it represented to me is just tenacity. That, at least for me, that if you kind of believe in your abilities, you're tenacious about stuff, and you just don't give up, you will get what you want. You don't always, but this represented a lot to me. This was a foundational picture for me. This is another kind of foundational picture for me. This is the maze. This is the border of the maze and the Needles District in Canyonlands. The maze is probably an area of the United States which is probably one of the hardest areas to get into. I'm lucky enough to be a National Geographic photographer. I have no idea how that happened, but they contacted me and published my work and put me up on their sites. So I hired an outfitting group out of Moab, and we took 10 days into the maze. And this is like the kind of area where if you travel, and not exaggerating, 10 miles will take you probably 12 hours. There's no roads there. You're rock climbing the whole way. And again, I'm out there for this is the 10th day, and I was a wreck. I mean, I had not taken a bath or a shower or anything cleaned up in 10 days. My hair was like dreadlocks. I just wanted to go home. I was exhausted. And the guy I was with was like, "Hey, one more time, let's go out. I have this one place. We have to get out there at 3, 4 in the morning. We have to climb this 1,000-foot mesa in the dark. And I got this one shot I want to show you. Nobody really knows about it." And I'm like, "No, I don't want to do this, But I said, "God damn it," excuse my language, but God damn it, let's do it." So I went up there, and this was the shot I got, which for me was kind of a culmination of what I had seen for the Needles District in Canyonlands. I'd been there a couple of times, but I had never got the one picture that represented that for me. Another area, White Pocket. This is, I took 5 days out into White Pocket. Have no idea how this was formed, but obviously it was underwater at some time. There's actually dinosaur tracks out at White Pocket. In the background, it's something called Brain Rock, which actually looks like Brain Rock, a really interesting area. But what I'm trying to do here is just take portraits of the things that I'm experiencing, the places that I go. This is an area, this is Superstition Mountain out in Arizona. We were out there for, this one was 4 or 5 days, and waited 4 or 5 days for that little cloud to go overhead because it was just bright sunlight. But it took 5 days to wait in that certain area just to get that picture. But again, this is another ancient volcano. This is Capitol Reef. Me and my son went out there. This is standing on I think a 2,000-foot mesa overlooking the valley. Anyway, something I shot a couple of weeks ago. It's actually a reshoot of something I was at out in Lone Pine. But to me, the images speak something to me. Each one to me is like a little child, you know. And I think even there was a quote that I read from, I think it was Renoir, who, I'm just going to read it because I wrote it down, is at the start of seeing a subject, you're always in a sort of a haze, but you know perfectly that what you should see later has been there all the time, you know. And the same thing for Monument Valley. Monument Valley has always been, you know, it's got such a, it's been photographed so many times. But I'd always see the picture that was a little bit different in Monument Valley. So again, I went up there with a Navajo guide. And we took 4 days out there, and I learned a lot about the Navajo culture at the time, and really wanted to take a portrait of Monument Valley that represented not so much to me what the valley was about, but to the Navajos what the valley was about, what it might have looked like when they first took a look at it. Also, a shot of Monument Valley. So I'm just going to go through these. All these pictures basically to me speak a special moment to me in time. Landscapes are really interesting for me to shoot. Actually, we'll get to some of the storm images, which people seem to be interested in. I actually take it as an artist that, I don't even know if I'm an artist, but if I am one, that the images were really just shot for me. I feel really lucky that people actually just like the images. One thing about these images, though, and you can see that out in the lobby, is that I'll talk a little bit about the technologies in a moment, but that for me, these are just JPEGs. These are proxies of the final images. But the print is really what my final image is, the final vision for my work is. So everything I'm doing, every way I'm shooting, everything about the capture is about what I'm going to do for a print. So if you do have time, you can go out later into the lobby and take a look at some of the prints. This was a reflection of me. This is Agatha Peak, which is the center, the geographical center of the Navajo Nation. But what this represented to me when I saw it was the Wizard of Oz. This is like the Wicked Witch's castle, you know. So, and I always kind of see those things when I'm photographing. There's another picture. This is the dollhouse. This is out in the Needles District again, but to me this is almost something like out of the Wizard of Oz. Some of these places are extremely remote. This is the maze, the kind of place where it's really fun to be in, but you also get, I think there's some kind of a, I don't know what people call it, when you're in a super remote location and there's like nobody around, like 20 miles around, except for maybe the person that you're with, and things start to really get close and truncated, and you know, you feel like if you're going to break an ankle, you're just going to die out there. So a lot of these locations were like that. This is Trona. I don't know if anybody knows what Trona is, the Trona Pinnacles. It's a really outrageous, beautiful place. It's where I love to practice photography. Actually, this is an area that Apollo used to practice their moonwalks before they went to the moon. So one of the areas in California that's most like the surface of the moon. But I was lucky enough to be out there in, like at that point, like 50-mile-an-hour winds and catch a lenticular cloud on top of the pinnacles. Another shot of Trona at a different time. This is driving through a dry lake bed with water up to the middle, to the top of my wheels in my four-wheel drive truck, just to get up to the pinnacles. This is almost an omen to one of the Ansel Adams shots, the Hernandez shot. And just for landscape photography, this, you know, everyone for me has a story. This is Goblin Valley. But at this point, I was covered with gnats from head to toe. Everything that was not covered was bit, you know. And I was covered. I had gloves. I had everything. My ears were just red. But I was like, I'm going to get the picture that I want. I had to wait there covered with gnats for a little while just to get that picture. I had to wait for the light to be right. Mexican hat. Me and my wife camped out in Toronto at this time. I have no idea what that was. I've heard it was just a rare occurrence. The sun was actually rising behind me. Maybe it was the dust in the air. But it was really interesting for National Geographic, where they published on my work, which was actually the storm work. When they took a look at the work, a lot of people, when I got into fine art photography, thought that a lot of this was manipulated images, and they're actually not. National Geographic had taken, at the time, some of my raw files on my 16-bit TIFFs and taken them to their lab just to make sure they weren't even graded too much. And I'll talk a little bit about the technology. This one is a meteor about to hit the Earth when I happened to snap a picture. It's actually a piece of rock, a piece of ice in Iceland. No, there's some people have looked at that and said they could not get a grasp of exactly what that was. Iceland is cold, and I was out there in March. But it was beautiful. Another shot of Iceland. And this is in a time where, I don't mean to be overly dramatic with it, but it was so cold out there that anything that was exposed froze. You don't usually get those kind of clouds on a mountainscape unless you're standing in the wind. And this is, the ocean is to your right here, and the winds were just coming off the ocean with nothing blocking them. And my hardest problem was breathing into a mask and having my glasses just turn to ice, you know. So I had to figure out how to photograph that. One of my lucky snapshots of Owens Lake. This one was interesting. This is a Joshua Tree. This one represented like a rock family to me. You know, this is like the dad's in the middle with the eye, the uncle's over there on the left, the aunt's on the right, and the punky kid with the spiky hair is kind of standing in the middle, and it's just standing there in a portrait, you know, a proud portrait. And also just something that was real simple to me. It was just like the basic use of light and shadow and tone. It was just a very simple photograph to me, but I really liked this photograph because of its simplicity. It's just it's just forms and light. I'll get into like another story. These stories are just interesting to me. This is me and my son going out to Escalante, and don't remember that, he's here. And we spent probably a week out there in December. Came through, nothing. I had no pictures. I froze. We were going through the snow. I got some good pictures, but nothing that I really liked. And as we were driving home, we went through the Virgin River Gorge and through a snowstorm. As we came out the other end, we had to take a break. We had to actually use the bathroom. So you know, we just got out. We said before we hit Las Vegas, let's just take one last break and we'll just bolt home. And I took my camera with me. My son, we went off hiking in different directions, and I heard my son just say, "Dad, come here," you know, and came over the ridge, and this was the picture. So I was out there for a week, maybe a little bit longer than a week, got nothing that I liked, and this was, I think, one of the last 3 pictures I shot at the trip, which again to me showed that you just never know, you know, you never know if you just stay tenacious and still believe that you can actually accomplish those things. Then I got into storm chasing because I always went out into inclement weather, and I thought that it would be really interesting to see what Tornado Alley was like. So this is a picture that came later in my. I'm not a storm chaser. I'm a photographer. I go out with a friend who's a storm chaser. He's brilliant. His name's Roger Hill, and this is like. I always saw in the series of pictures that I was taking that I needed an iconic tornado picture. And this was kind of like a reflection to me again of The Wizard of Oz. In fact, when I was at Sony, I worked at Sony for a while. Sam Raimi had done a remake of Wizard of Oz, and the visual effects supervisor had said, "Hey, we heard we're in a room, we're looking at all this, we're doing some research on like tornadoes for the sequence." And we saw this picture, and then somebody in the room said, "Hey, you know, that guy works here, you know." So anyway, so I had to make a big print for them, and they used this for some of their research on the tornado sequence. But anyway, this was a really easy picture to shoot. We were like 1.5 miles from the tornado. It was moving east to west. It was quiet, and I could take my time and compose. And again, this is another picture that I actually had seen in my mind before I had gone out there. This is last year. So a little bit about storm chasing, or about photographing the storm systems. I had never seen anything like this in my life. These are real pictures. These are like real situations. But you know, coming from the East Coast and going out there and seeing this, they're just awe-inspiring. It's no way to actually. These pictures don't even do justice to what these storm systems really are. A lot of the challenge for me initially for storm systems, I was set up as a landscape photographer, and a lot of the equipment I was using was not ready for landscape photography. So I had to adapt the first couple of years the way that I was shooting. But compositions are constantly changing. Light's constantly changing. There's chaos going all around you. You have to focus. The only thing that I listen to when I'm out photographing storms now is Roger's voice saying, like, we have to get the hell out of here, like, right now, you know? And that's the only thing I listen to, because everything else I just have to really focus and get, again, into that zone for photography. It's really helped me improve as a photographer. And the one thing I can say about photography for me is I really do think that my best images are still to come. There was a famous, semi-famous photographer, or at least he thinks he's famous, who I actually met at one point when I first started, and he was talking to me and telling me about how his images looked the same from 1979 into 2000, and I think at the time it was like 2007. How all the transitions are the same, how the pictures look the same, the compositions look the same. And I kind of looked at him and I said, well, have you changed? I mean, how could your photography be the same? Have you grown in 25, 30 years? And I looked over at his wife, who actually kicked me under the table and smiled at me when I said that, because I did not understand like how, as a photographer, your images either can't get better, or how you, as you grow as a person, as you mature, that the visions that you have and your experiences should be reflected in your work. This was kind of interesting. I don't think Lorraine was with me on this one. I think ABC News was with us in this one, and they thought it was really fun to be out there chasing storms. And they got out there and they're playing around with their cameras and stuff out in the field, and this thing turned the corner and came at us, and they got destroyed. The cameras, this was a huge hailstorm. It actually did a lot of damage in Moorcroft. This is Wyoming. The interesting picture about this that happened to me, though, is that little house on the bottom right, somehow my work got published by the Audubon Society. And the Audubon magazine made it to the beauty parlor in Moorcroft, population of maybe 200. And actually the grandson saw that picture and actually emailed me and said, you know, how did you get there during that storm? Can I have some pictures for my grandma, whose house that is? And it just like, it showed me what a small world we live in, you know? But this was a pretty amazing storm. This was the first trip out, and when I turned to Roger, it was like, Roger, we're gonna die. And he was like, don't worry about it, we'll be fine. This thing is actually dissipating as it's coming down. But these images all mean something special to me. You know, me and my wife and my son went out to Los Alamos one year. And that summer, I went out and shot the monsoons out in Arizona and came back with this. You know, and it was just that visualization of like an experience that I had in my life of seeing kind of the amazing stuff that actually the history of Los Alamos and went on with the nuclear weapons and all that interesting history that I really didn't know much about. My wife was mad at me because she was trying to paint atomic explosions at the time. So I came back with this, but I had never experienced the monsoons before. Mammatus clouds. The after effect of a pretty violent storm. This was a ghost. This is in the dark. You know, I saw this thing. This is like the monster in the closet type thing for me, where you know, the storm was out in the field. I could see it every time the lightning flashed. So I just had to do the best to focus and compose. Some of the real interesting things about photography is you can get out to some of these locations and, you can just blow it. You can blow your exposure, your focus. You have like one shot at this stuff. This is a land spout. This thing was gigantic. I think this was about, they were saying this is about 2,000 to 3,000 feet up. There's like, if you look at the bottom, you can see some light poles. Some electric poles on the bottom there that give this thing a scale. So I'm just trying to show with these images my experience of being out there, seeing some of these amazing phenomenons. The storms to me, this looked like World of Worlds to me for some reason. But the experience for me of these storms is that what's really interesting is when you see these storms and they're created, they have to be created when the environment's right. The humidity, the airflow, all these things have to take place at the right time. It's almost like the birth of a person. And when all these elements come together, eventually they start to form and they get unpredictable initially. And sometimes they'll die quickly, and sometimes they'll take off, and sometimes they'll get super violent. And then essentially they start to take a form. They start to form into something that has structure, and eventually they start to lose that form, and they age out and they just die. So as I'm photographing these storms, they're actually like living beings, things to me, and I'm just trying to capture, I'm trying to do justice to each one of these storms, because, they'll never be again, like these structures, these storms, these pictures. I don't have to worry about another photographer copying these images. They can shoot storms all they want, but these storms are once in a lifetime type events. And they're just phenomenal. So all I'm trying to do here is to do justice to this. I love the play of light and dark and things like this. This was a pretty amazing lightning storm. Lots of people use different techniques for shooting lightning. I don't use a lightning trigger. I just use long exposures, and it's the luck of the draw. But I feel like that's the way that I want to shoot. I want to be as natural as I possibly can be with these photographs. I'll talk a little bit about light. This is the second time I actually saw a storm. This was in Nebraska. And this thing was probably, maybe according to some people, the most violent storm of the year. Why it's so white on the bottom is it was a long exposure and multiple lightning strikes. It's a mesocyclone, basically. But what I'm doing, so now I'll talk a little bit about the technology and the printing and how, before I run out of time, how I get to this. Pretty much going back to Pete Turner and breaking all the rules. When you shot black and white film in the day, you used to load black and white film. You shot color film, you used color film. Today with digital technology, digital cameras, today at least, digital cameras in black and white are extremely expensive. But the black and white sensors are naturally black and white. What happens is for the camera manufacturers to build these cameras, they need to emulate how we see. So we see, as far as light waves are concerned, about between 400 and 700 nanometers of light. That's how we see. So when you see there's a sensor. On top of the sensor goes a bare pattern. A bare pattern it goes over each pixel. It's filters basically, 2 green, 1 red, 1 blue. That's because our eyes see more green than red than blue. So they try to emulate the way that our eyes see. They also truncate light, so the sensors can see, even though we see from 400 to 700 nanometers of light, sensors can see between roughly 300 nanometers to about 1100 nanometers of light. So I don't believe in that stuff. So I can't take the bare patterns off, even though I've tried. There's a gentleman out in New Jersey, and we've blown up a lot of sensors doing this, trying to take the bare patterns off. But I do take off anti-aliasing filters, which are only made so there's no more ray when you take pictures. I've done this for 10 years now. It's a big deal. They think the cameras sell for more money when they take those off. I also take off the IR blocking filters. And in black and white, that allows me to see in an infrared, ultraviolet, things that you can't see with your natural eye. It also allows me then to, the way that I filter is based on the environment and what I'm looking at. it allows me to use my camera as a paintbrush now. Now I can filter based on what I'm shooting, what the light looks like, what the environment looks like. It just allows me to use my camera as a brush. I'm not somebody who shines his cameras up. I usually throw my cameras out. I trash my cameras. My lenses are more important than my cameras. But my cameras are basically a brush. You know, if I was I would call it, if I was a painter, it would be my paintbrush. So I filter basically with screw-on lenses, screw-on filters on the lenses, how I would want to. I actually had worked with Sony. Somehow I won, it's another story, Photographer of the Year for Sony, and they made a big deal out of it. And one of the first cameras they shot was an R1, which was a mirrorless camera. It made sense for Sony because Sony had always invented video cameras, which never had mirrors on it. So when I was talking to Sony at the time, it was like, why? They discontinued the camera, and I wasn't happy about that because I always felt like having a mirror box in a camera was kind of old school thinking. So light's coming through the lens, it's bouncing off a bunch of mirrors and going through the viewfinder. But you can never see what you're actually shooting with, what you're actually shooting. It was great for sports photography because it allows you to focus quickly. But for landscape photography, I use the LCD, so I use the live view on the cameras. So now when I filter with things like an IR lens, IR filter, which is opaque, so when you shot with that in film, you'd have to look at it, you screw on the filter, and you could not see what you were shooting. But now I can actually see what the sensor's seeing. I can see the direct feed off the sensor. So anyway, that is like one of the ways that I've adapted my shooting, my cameras. Also, there's a lot of techniques as far as printing. You know, again, everything's important as far as the print's concerned. There's a lot of literature on the right way to shoot with a sensor. If you think of a sensor, you usually see things like noise in the shadows. That's because that part of the sensor pretty much inputs the least amount of data. The highlights are what has the most amount of data. If you shoot with your histogram to the right, you're moving your shadows into a more sweet spot on the sensor, and you're getting a cleaner image basically when you do a print. So I think all these things, when it comes down to a print, makes a big difference. You know, also with printing, the more that you manipulate an image, the more data you throw away. When you're in something like Photoshop, which is my editor, every time you're turning a slider, you're throwing data away. If you took like an 8-bit JPEG, and you kind of move sliders around in Photoshop and took a look at your histogram, it looks like a tooth comb. That's because you've thrown away all that data. So now, working in raw files, and I think Ansel had always said that you know, pretty much the original capture for him, the film negative, kind of represented, you know, the beginning of the journey. But the symphony, the way it was orchestrated, was really the way the print was made.
The score of the performance?
Score of the performance. Thank you, Paul. So really, I'm going towards the performance with this, you know, but I do need to have the foundation of data structure to be correct. This is a little diffused because I was standing in the pouring rain, but it was quite a sight, you know. Then printing is a whole different level, you know. I've probably spent tens of thousands of dollars throwing away papers and inks and printers and experimenting. People think that digital printing, I came from the wet darkroom, so I came from originally the cold light. I shot with 4x5s and 8x10s, cold light printing, sensitometry. When I moved into the digital darkroom, it was completely different, but it was just as complex. So to come out with a digital museum quality print was just as challenging as doing silver printing. Over time, it's taken time to be able to do all my own prints, but it's taken time and energy to be able to kind of perfect the printing process, just like a printer of silver prints. This is interesting. So this was a triptych. a different story with my youngest son, which was like, this is going back to family a little bit, but I asked my son to come out with me storm chasing because I wanted him to have an experience with his dad that he would remember for the rest of his life. So I wanted to have a picture of him standing in front of a tornado. And he was like, yeah, Dad, right, you know. Anyway, I don't have the picture here, but we were standing in Nebraska and had experienced twin tornadoes in Pilgrim, Nebraska. And actually my son took a selfie of himself standing in front of those tornadoes. And he swears he didn't say, Dad, can we get out of here now? But I remember him saying that to me. I thought you were kidding. But this was a triptych. This is actually hanging in National Weather Center now. They have purchased this in something that they thought was both scientific to them. They had never seen something like this, like in stills at that quality, and also somewhat artistic, if you want to call it that. Just scale. This is just a beautiful scene. Everybody was shooting in this direction I was with, and I looked in that direction. I'm going to go a little bit faster here. That's that same tornado that the triptych was in a different moment. Then Los Angeles. I don't want to run too far over, but I think Los Angeles is beautiful. I know a lot of people don't think that. I wouldn't live here if I didn't think that. So I came from the East Coast. When I came over the 405 and I saw the San Fernando Valley, I thought it looked like Yosemite Valley. I thought it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen in my life. I didn't know where I was. I pulled off the freeway at Roscoe Boulevard. I made a right. I saw a place for rent, and I moved in there, you know. I didn't know where the hell I was. I had no idea where I was. But I had to go back, like, I don't know how many years later, 30 years later maybe, 25 years later, and capture that shot, you know, of what I felt like when I first saw Los Angeles. So people like Paul were really mad at me. Paul represents me in Los Angeles Gallery because I didn't know what I was doing when I started in photography and like fine art photography. The one thing I can say is that I've always concentrated on the pictures. I've never concentrated, I don't want to be famous, I don't want fame, I don't care about all that stuff, that ego, I have to drop all that stuff. I just concentrate on the pictures. But everything that came to me that I realized in my photography actually came to me. Like Paul called me, I don't know, I never called you, I don't think, you know. I have books, a book by Aperture, 2 by 21st editions. I think I have a show in Dubai right now. Everything came to me, and the thing that to exhort anybody about that with is I just focused on the pictures. I just wanted to take good pictures. It was my art. It was really important to me. It was spiritual to me. It was like everything that I'm about is reflected in these pictures. You know, people talk a talk, and I'm not and people are really nice. I love people, but it's not about that. It's about this kind of work reflects me, and the other photographers that are out there in the world. Those pictures reflect them, and the pictures that you would take reflect you. And I think that it's important to be able to drop. For me, it was important to drop a lot of what was worldly about the world when I take pictures and just focus on this quiet place that I can get into. The city of LA actually came to me. I don't know how they came to me or found me, but they commissioned installations in the metro systems because they had never really seen people take pictures of LA that made LA look good, you know. So these are some of the pictures, you know. This is my experience of Los Angeles. This is how I feel about LA, you know. And I actually do love the city. I think it's beautiful. You know, if I could, I wish I could live, you know, 500 years and watch, you know, people they buy a house and they think they own it. But in reality, you don't own that. You're borrowing it. If I could take a picture of this 500 years, you'd see the buildings come and go and come and go and build and decay and come and go. But the landscape would stay pretty much the same unless we get a large earthquake or something, you know. But otherwise, you know, the land is precious, you know. And I think I'm just trying to reflect that in the city. So, you know, and I just think that so I'm pretty honored to be at Google talking about this stuff because I think Google is doing some things now that are both, I would say revolutionary, But also, I think when it comes to the work that's truly being done, I think for mankind it's more actually evolutionary. You know, I think that we're actually evolving now into, this is my opinion, I just think we're still somewhat in the dark ages of technology. I think it's just starting to accelerate now. 50, 100 years from now, who knows what will take place. But I do think that I'm just honored to be here. So thank you for inviting me, Martin, thank you. Thank you, Ben, appreciate it. So I think we wanted to leave time for questions, or
We have
I
this
don't know
really
why.
cool new mic.
is it? Okay.
So Mitch, I know you've worked a long time in visual effects. So what is your opinion now on the ethics of modifying the picture after you've taken it? Because you could probably save yourself a lot of time waiting for the light if you just change the lighting.
Yeah, no, I would just say that I don't have any judgment about anybody who does that. Knock yourself out. It's just not the way that I want to conduct myself. You know, to me, this is what I do. This is the way I want to do it. I was talking to Ben earlier and just saying, even, you know, with prints, when I see prints of other photographers, and I've bought a couple of them, and I don't look at a lot of other photography. I try to stay in my little vacuum. I don't. It's a journey to me. You know, the whole idea of planning to go to a location, to go to a location, to actually shooting a shot, to editing the shot on a computer, to seeing the first prints come out, to seeing somebody like a gallery, somebody saying, hey, we'd like a print of that, seeing somebody buy the print. When that happens, I don't even let anybody pack the prints. I usually cut to tape and I bring it to FedEx, and it's a journey, you know, and I have to kind of complete that journey, but that's just me, you know. So nothing about manipulating images, knock yourself out. It's just not what I want to do, you know.
What about transparency? Like no one thinks they have a right to ask the photographer how they got the shot before the shot, but most people seem to want transparency in exactly how it was modified after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see any essential distinction there, or is it all just part of the artistic process?
I think it's all part of the artistic journey, you know. And for me, it was just like there's a couple of things that I was happy about in my journey, which was like somebody like National Geographic certifying that the pictures weren't heavily modified, and actually having some museums collect my prints, which to me wasn't about a museum collecting my print because I was so good and great and all that stuff. It was just that I had reached a place with my art that somebody thought that it would go into a collection for a long time and maybe be, you know, a little bit more eternal, you know, than just temporal. So, you know, to me, and the books were really important to me. The print, I don't know what's going on with print in the future, you know. Everything that's going on the internet now, I was really happy about the books because I think, you know, the print is, to me, is that my end product. It's amazingly valuable to look at something like that. I highly respect all the other ways that media is being interpreted now. But to me, it was just the way I was in my DNA that the print was my final product, you know, so. The bathroom is over.
I know this is probably not going to be one of the best questions you've ever heard. In fact, it's
Probably the best
probably
one.
pretty classic.
Uh-huh.
What's your favorite picture that you've taken and, well, why?
No, that's a really good question. The favorite picture I've taken is the shiprock picture, and it's because it meant the most to me. In fact, I have it tattooed on my arm. That's how much it meant to me.
Wow.
And that's just because when I go through my days, it's kind of like a quarterback in a football. If you watch football, sometimes they just have to look down at what plays going on. I just need to be inspired sometimes, you know. And that picture just inspired me. Not so much the picture, but the experience of capturing it.
How did the experience inspire you to do what exactly? Like,
How did it?
I mean, like to become a better photographer, or
Yeah,
what?
it taught me about believing in myself a little bit more. That when all those things were going through my mind that I couldn't do something, that I just put my head down and kept on doing it, even though that voice on my shoulder was saying that I couldn't do it. And I ended up doing it. I don't think it was an accident, you know. So I think what happens is that maybe there's a photography god that says, you know, when I've spilled enough sweat and blood on a landscape photography, they'll open up and show me what I came for. I truly believe that. Sometimes I think that you really just need to put your head down and persevere through something, you know. And I drove 1,200 miles for that picture, you know, for just one picture. Oh,
Thanks, Mitch.
thank you. Those are great
Thank you.
questions, by the way.
I love the stories about sort of how you sort of track down the pictures that you want. I was wondering, what's the sort of the longest time you've spent between coming up with an idea for a picture that you wanted and getting the shot you wanted?
Right now, probably. So for me, in my personal life, I've been working, like Dan had said, in like visual effects and technology for, I don't know, 25 years. And decided that I won't call it, you know, it's really interesting work. But it was just time for me to chase my dream and get back into my photography and get into what was important for me for my life. I think life is super short. We're not here very long. Even if you live to be 100, it's just a drop in the bucket. I don't even know my great-great-great-grandfather's name, you know? So they existed, they had rougher lives than I've had. But I've decided, like, over the past probably 4 months that I need to get back into that zone. So the world that I was in before had basically sucked my creativity out of me, and it was just time to move on. So some of the pictures that I showed from the Lone Pine by accident, those are actually, I wasn't really there to really shoot pictures. It was more like just to start to get back into that zone, with some of the beginnings of, you know, this next journey that I'm going to take on. And like I said before, I think you do grow as a person, and as you grow into a person, I hope that my images evolve, and I always have thought that my best images will come. You know, that I'm not done. This is just probably the middle of my journey right now. Hope that answered the question. So right now, I'm getting back into it after about a 3-month break.
Are there any more questions? Yep.
I really enjoyed your talk. I liked the way how you explained your work through light and spirituality. I assume the Los Angeles work is your newest work?
It's what?
Your newest, or?
No, it's not
No,
actually.
it's
Some of my older.
Oh yeah.
work.
So,
Yeah, the one that I never finished the story about Paul, like that first shot, which I labeled like civilization. I'll back it up a couple. This shot, I think I shot that in 2006, and
Oh, yeah.
why the galleries didn't like it is I did an edition of 100, and the galleries are like,
Makes
you
sense.
can't do an edition of 100. You're, you know, edition of 5. You sell it at like a zillion dollars, and 100. How are we going to sell? So that edition's at like 92 of 100 now. So
cool.
they're wrong. They were wrong.
Um,
So anyway, because people related somehow to that image. I mean, when I first showed it to some of my friends, they were like, "Oh, nice," and they were like, "Wait a second, those buildings? I thought they were just trees and mountains." you
yeah,
know?
exactly. That's
So,
when you look at this image.
yeah,
You could kind of blend it into your landscape photography, and out of then, gosh, there is a skyscraper or kind of a house. So, but the difference between the landscape photography or the natural landscape photography and the urban landscape photography you do here is that you, I think you photograph from the ground in the landscape, but here you have this overview, right?
right.
So I'm wondering, is it from a helicopter or always from skyscrapers or
It's from Mulholland Drive,
all of them?
and we only live 5 minutes from there, so it's really easy for me to
Oh,
get
cool.
to. And a lot of times when I was photographing LA, just the honest truth, not this, but some of the other ones, is that I couldn't get out into the Southwest, into Utah, or I couldn't get out. It wasn't storm season. I just was itchy to get out and photograph. So I just grabbed the camera on a stormy day and just run up the hill and just see if I see something of the city that I really love, you know? So, yeah, so a lot of these were just because I was itchy to shoot and I couldn't get out of town. And it was just time. And the city is really, to me, beautiful during the rains, during the rainy season.
I know.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, Mitch.
Hey, Blair.
Hey, what did you mean by when you said you go out to practice shooting?
Oh, I think sometimes, like now, if there's a break, let's say I've had a couple of month break between shooting, you have to, it's a basketball player, you know, you can't go into finals of tonight, you know. I'm sure LeBron practiced this week before he's getting ready to shoot, you know, before he's getting ready to play. So with photography, for me, it's the same thing. I have to kind of warm up. I have to get into that mode. It's meditative to me. So during the day, it could be chaotic. There's things going on. I got to go food shop. I got to do something, walk the dog, and all this other stuff. That's fun, actually, walking the dog. But you know, I have to get into that mode. I have to feel that mode again. And sometimes I can't remember what that mode feels like. So I know when I go out to Trona, which I actually haven't been out to in a little while, but I'm going to plan on going there as soon as we get the next change in weather. You know, I can get quickly into that zone there. There's nobody out there. There's no people there. It's quiet. It looks like another planet out there. And it just allows me to kind of get into that zone of photography, to see like a photographer again. You know, and usually what I do to start to actually practice that is when I walk around, I start to look at compositions and practice being a photographer, even though I don't have a camera with me. So that's what I meant by practice, is just to start to kind of practice dribbling a basketball, practice, you know, swinging the bat, just practice getting back into that quiet place where I can kind of feel myself get grounded again and ready to photograph. Cool.
Okay, could we thank our speaker one
Thank
more
you.
time?